Yeah, Hannes, I have so many questions. So, first of all, how is Carbon Future doing right now? What have you, in like to say, the last 6 months, which is, I guess, an eternity in the CDR world, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But
I mean, the environment is quite challenging with the overall macroeconomic and global societal developments recently, which kind of start to more and more continue to look away from environmental and climate issues. So that is a general theme that, of course, also affects us. Still, I think our value proposition and our positioning in the emerging carbon removal sector remains valid and also sought after. So our stakeholders are typically, and our clients and partners are typically, yeah, leaders in the industry who have a strategic angle to that. So these short-term, or hopefully only short-term effects don't change much here. And we also saw this basically, for example, when the you saw the recent announcement of the like megaton biochar transaction facilitated by us and like supported by our carbon tracking system between Microsoft and ExoMat Green. Um, so of course this was a transaction we have long been working on. And yeah, together with partners with whom we are working for a while already now. But this is, of course, a major milestone for us and the industry. So really, a couple of good signs. Also, other commercial proof points which show we are well on track and that our solutions are kind of respected and needed in the market. And also, when you look a bit further back, we took on a strategic investor, the SIX Group, Swiss Exchange, one of the globally leading exchange groups. And also here, a proof point that with our approach, we are providing something to this industry which is considered to be a key building block. And with these, yeah, strategic partners, I would say we are in a good position and yeah, help the industry to grow, professionalize, mature, embed in other industrial value chains, and yeah, be relevant and meaningful for the society as it functions. Also beyond the the primary goal of climate protection, right? So creating jobs and kind of be kind of a core element of how we economically interact in our societies. Yeah, so overall, still optimistic, still fighting, and yeah,
well, that's
building a new sector.
yeah. I see that you definitely are a leader in the space, especially well before the big announcement. But that megaton announcement with Axomat Green was very exciting, and I see that people are appreciating what you're saying, the professionalization of the industry, or at least creating this digital quality layer that a lot of people can relate to that are from the investor side. So at least, yes, I'm really happy to see that. Now, when we're talking about removals and um, we had a big bump in the road for DAC with the Climeworks article from Iceland. How did you respond to that when you saw it?
I mean, for us who are inside the CDR bubble, so to say, I wouldn't say it's any form of scandal or also not probably a big surprise that these leaders encounter challenges, and it was also not like something completely new that a new first of a kind facility is not operating, for example, on full capacity. So here, yes, it's a bit of a reality check for the public, but for me it was not entirely surprising. And that on the one side, and on the other side, I would say the trigger for this news, as I understood it, was a bit of a pacing that the Climeworks leadership had to decide on, given their really super ambitious growth path they were on. So they started really to test out. They were the first ones to really test out. Also, can we already scale this industry or in an industrial yeah volumes and of course you learn on this journey and it's a costly thing to scale, right? And of course I'm sorry for the kind of some negative press, but I think they remain a leader in the industry and yeah,
Yeah.
continue to fight together and realize yeah all the technologies out there to draw down carbon from the atmosphere.
A lot of people like to amplify the negatives of CDR, and they always hyper focus on DAC as the sort of poster child for why CDR doesn't work. And so that's why from where I sit here, it was a little bit of a tempest in a teapot, probably, for a minute
Yeah.
on LinkedIn, as they say. But at the same time, it creates a sort of a plot point on the trajectory of where we all want to go, and it's one of those things that puts a little bit of a drag, especially on maybe new people that would have entered the space and all of that. So I was disappointed to see it, but
Maybe, but maybe it's a good starting point to look a bit deeper, right? And I think that there's kind of the industrialization of our sector is really in the very beginning, in its infancies. Biochar carbon removal is at a certain scale. It's still, I mean, a megaton is a thousandth of a gigaton, right? So, and people sometimes have a hard time to distinguish thousand, millions, and billions because it's hard to imagine. So we are still tiny, 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 tiny. And biochar carbon removal, yes, on a certain scale, but the other technologies are partially like just a bit earlier. And now when we look at how to come to a position where you really can scale, so you have to understand the economics, and the economics have to do with yeah with energy, of course, but also with material sourcing and operational learnings and maybe I forgot some stuff, but probably not. Energy, materials, and learn how to operate. And here also Climeworks made like super relevant data points that they created to yeah learn what works and what doesn't. For example, is Iceland the right location? That would be a question you can now answer with them, or at least they can answer. I don't know the answer exactly, but so it's an absolutely necessary um, element in the building the foundations of creating an industry, and then looking really at the economics of it.
well, it's interesting when the more I talk about this industry with others, it looks to me like, given the amount of material flows that have to occur, it's something that has to be built into the industrial process, right? So, for example, when we went to see Exomad Green in Bolivia, you saw that what they were simply doing was taking the waste of that activity, and pyrolyzing it, and then giving it to the farmers in the locality, right? So you're not
Hmm.
really, so the material's already there, the need is already there on the farmer side. So basically, for something like biochar, that has to just be replicated across the world, right? Where you're, taking local material, pyrolyzing it, applying it to the earth. The reason why I'm putting it in those terms is ERW is a bit in the same boat, right? You have a lot of localized materials. There's a lot of waste in mines that you can grab it and apply it to farmland locally. And in the case of DAC, it can be local geothermal. It just depends on where, right? So, or it could be heat off of an industry that has excess heat, which is what Climeworks did in the first place, right?
Hmm.
So I remember you and Matthias were saying that you're basically building an economy inside the carbon cycle, wherein you're almost reversing, instead of pricing the use of carbon, you're pricing the removals. Is that inside that circularity that I was just describing, perhaps?
Absolutely. I think what you described for example for Exomat Green and also for some enhanced rock weathering cases where you have basically it's almost like a low-hanging fruit, right? You have the material there. Some call it waste at this point in time, but as soon as you pyrolyze it and apply it, it's not waste. It's a resource, and also what has been waste is like the feedstock to something valuable. So that is, of course, the idea of the circularity, and on top, of course, comes the um, uh, the appreciation, also the monetary appreciation of the climate service that comes with immobilizing the carbon from the short-lived carbon cycle to an inert form, which is the pyrolyzed biochar, for example, or in case of enhanced rock weathering, the bicarbonates in the runoff waters. So yes, that is kind of the obvious thing, to use excess material, excess energy, whatever you have as a resource at hand, and it's super important economically to do it exactly at those places where it makes more sense and these resources are available. But when you really want to scale this up in an industrial way, we it it starts to become more tricky, right? It gets like beyond these low-hanging fruits. So you have to think about how can I embed carbon removing activities in value chains that exist, for example, in material flows that exist. I just recently visited wastewater treatment plant where they increased the alkalinity, right? So you have all the material there, the applications of the I forgot which material it was, but like to increase the alkalinity in this controlled environment, you just had to add a bit more, right? So this is kind of an embedded a process that already exists, and you kind of put a bit more energy, a bit more material in to remove carbon. Or in the case of biochar, if you apply it to soil in some environments, it improves the soil conditions, and you have an additional value, of course. But the idea, like as a next step beyond these projects like Exomat Green, where you have a kind of an obvious case at hand, is to focus on the activities that in combination lead to more carbon immobilized from the short-lived carbon cycles, and with that hopefully enable the scaling of these or the kind of the incorporation of these activities in our existing value chains.
Do you have an
Because
example of
bigger,
that? Do you have an example? Sorry, I don't want
yeah,
to. If you don't, it's fine. But do you know what
that,
I mean? Like, what's the next step from immediate like waste products that I guess we're looking at when we're again? Let's
I,
define that we're talking about mostly what by pyrolysis, biochar, and ERW at this point, right? Or OAE, which I think that's because they're all needing these materials, right? That they're in the
I mean,
industrial system.
I would approach it maybe from two angles. I'll give two examples, and both are related to biocarbons. And one is actually not a removal, which I find really interesting because, um, of course, these when the value chains get longer, you can also focus on parts of the value chain. For example, the usage of excess material, for example, biocarbons, instead of burning them or letting them rot, pyrolyzing them, and I mean, super simplified, replacing fossil coke in metallurgy, right? So you have a small part of the removal value chain, which is not ending as a removal because most of the biocarbons that you apply in metallurgy are released back in the atmosphere, but still you have started to empower a um, or to you have started to implement a value creation that can also lead to carbon removal instead of a uh, fossil processes. That is one idea, one element, and the other one also from is obvious from biochar is, for example, um, replacing peat in agricultural contexts, right? So you have these substrates which include peat. And I don't know how it's where the peat is sourced from in the US, but here we have here in Europe we have a lot from the Baltics and all this like the import of the peat from there and it's of course a hugely carbon not carbon negative, so climate detrimental process. And if you use biocarbons here and replace the peat, that would be something.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Interesting.
maybe last one, um, biocarbons or CO2 in building materials.
Yeah,
The built
that's
environment is hugely, yeah, a
absolutely.
lot of material transported.
And as a company, since you are running a company that has to make some of those choices right now, you've leaned in on biochar primarily, right? In terms of, and then you're moving to ERW, I think, right? I remember correctly,
We,
but mostly it's biochar right now, correct? Or
biochar and other biomass-based removals.
right,
So
right.
we are working with BECS companies. We also do support direct air capture. Um, that is, I mean, we are basically a software product company, so we approach also the industry with like thinking about how can we best service the most suitable software product, and of course BECS and direct air capture have a lot in common when it comes to dealing with the liquid CO2, and so that's also one of the aspects. And from a scale up perspective, we have the assumption at the moment that, I mean, biochar, we see the scale up already. The BECS projects have huge potential, and ERW. I mean, here we are monitoring closely, and we see that the companies who are active in that space focus mostly on getting the monitoring right. And so it's more specialized companies, like, for example, Everest Carbon, who are specializing on how can we do MRV very specifically for enhanced rock weathering. And our kind of more standardized services come a bit later in the like maturities. How do you say? Like in the
Maturation phase. Yeah.
maturation phase of the
So
industry.
you're like coming after they figure that out. Yeah, they figure
Yeah,
out the MRV.
exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. Yeah.
They are good signs. I mean, the first credits under independent standards are issued, so we are a bit further along, but for us, it's still a bit too early.
Hmm. Yeah, I found it interesting also. So, have you been sad about any sort of companies that have had a hard time with their scaling or their next step beyond pilot?
I think there is a consolidation happening, but I'm not sure if maybe some really early ideas don't get the funding they would need to kind of come to do you say fruition? I don't know.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Is
No,
that
I mean
the,
your English is way better than my German, but
no.
no, yeah. So coming to fruition. So yeah, even you mean coming out of the lab, right? So
Yeah,
coming out of
exactly.
yeah,
And but
yeah,
but the bit later ideas and concepts and I mean not every startup has to survive every phase. That's just like it's a reality that's okay for startups. And we have these cycles. Funding environment is super tough at the moment. But it also was a bit yeah, exaggerated or money was really cheap in 21, 22. So kind of a natural correction here from a startup perspective, of startup environment perspective, I would say. However, from a carbon removal industry perspective, I think there is really a gap in funding and public support and policy support, because it's not it's probably not, no, it's for sure not sufficient to leave kickstarting this industry to um, startups and venture capitalists. I mean, it's insufficient, right? So the society has to do more, and kind of trade associations, companies also, like in this, yeah. I mean, you have the science-based targets. I'm really, they are heroes in terms of what they did so far, but when it comes to carbon removal, they really lack the right approaches and the, yeah, it's not fit for purpose what our and now I make the parallel to photovoltaics, which is often made, but often I think not on a precise enough level. Because how did it happen that photovoltaics did scale? I'm not claiming I know it perfectly, but there were niches where photovoltaics was working commercially, and there was some investments, and then there was policy support, and it started like on the parking lots and the mountain huts, and then in Germany on some dentists' roofs, and then there was a public program, I think the thousands roofs program, and all these little niches, like you can jump here, jump there, and then we could scale the industry, and now it should be like only like venture capital. No, I mean, we carbon removal does not provide electricity. It costs electricity. It costs energy, and so we need society to pay for it, and it can't be only on kind of the personal energy of a couple of founders and scientists, and the fantasy and dreams, and maybe yeah, unrealistic dreams of some venture capitalists. So
Yeah.
I
In
think there's a
terms
gap.
of, yeah, yeah, there is. And I was thinking about the commercialization of some of these ideas. So when you say it takes energy, but then I think of Marcel Huber saying, he's created a reverse power plant, which you were in
He's a
that shot. Where'd
genius.
you get it? He is a genius. But right, um, so taking wood waste to pyrolyze to, creating the syngas, and then
Yeah,
getting
it's true.
energy, and then creating biochar. So that is the future, right? Where
That is part of an
one
embedded
future,
system.
right?
It is embedded in value creation, where you can where you produce heat and electricity as the primary product, and in this embed some carbon removal activities. And I mean, from an energy balance perspective, there is still caloric value in the biocarbon. So also not like gasifying even more, or burning it off in some form, the biocarbon that's left, even in the Syncraft plants, is kind of leaving a bit of energy on the table. But yes, I mean, Marcel's power plants are actually carbon negative, and it is a great example. And I think also commercially, it is a leading example how you can embed carbon removal activities in value creation, also in industrialized contexts, or in kind of a bit more. I somehow consider it more dense dense environments in terms of economic activities. You can't leave like value on the table in like Central Europe, because all the value chains are optimized.
Right. That makes sense. And also, where does fuels come in? CCU, carbon
Oh
capture and
wow.
fuels. What? Too much?
You're asking me as if I was an expert on things that,
Well, I regard you as an expert, which is why, no, because I know you think about this stuff and you're a mathematician, right? So you must have thought of the efficiencies of that. I have had two conversations recently about it. Um, One saying it's just so inefficient, forget it, you'd never use any energy to make this stuff. By the way, I think regardless of, let's say, whatever it looks like on an Excel sheet somewhere in California, doesn't mean that a young entrepreneur in Africa or Norway or wherever might do it anyway to a point. And I mean, I look at dimensional energy that does it, that takes solar to DAC to fuels.
yeah, I mean,
So where are
for
you in
sure,
all that?
I'm definitely a strong supporter. Leave the leave fossil carbon in the ground. Take out only what as much as we really need for stuff we can't do otherwise. And there is really a complex topic, right? The fuels topic, and it's part of how you look at energy systems, I would say. And as you say, solar, where solar is abundant, like let's use and this old concept like power to something, power to liquids, to power storage elements, and one could be, of course, hydrogen and methanol, and then like all the value chains that you can service with that. And what is interesting for me is from a carbon future perspective, like those people are coming from the energy, and we track carbon. So, and if you have hydrogen and we come in with CO2 and bring it together to make fuels out of that, that's an interesting kind of, these are interesting activities where these value chains meet somehow. And that's what I mean with that we have to, when I say we have to overcome the idea of a project-based carbon removal financing or a carbon removal scale-up approach, and look at activities which make sense on our decarbonization, or inside the bubble, say sometimes defossilization path. Um, so yes, it makes a lot of sense. And then, like, let's understand these activities. Let's document them properly. For that, we are here, right, to do that in an efficient and digital and standardized way. And then kind of do a bit these baby steps, like, okay, we can defossilize based on the kind of the economic where it makes sense economically. Start with I mean, on the sustainable aviation fuels, we have the cooking oil based stuff already there, and the e-fuels a bit further out and much more expensive, but they are also kind of in development, and also regulation is here. Here we have regulation already in place in Europe, for example. There is binding regulations for the usage of sustainable aviation fuels, and even e-fuels sub-quotas, ESAF sub-quotas. So yes, it's coming, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, and it'll achieve. I mean, my assumption, and this is again someone who I only can know as much as what I learned from people like yourself who I speak with and whatever I'm reading, but I'm not a mathematician, so I wasn't sure if, some people are claiming it would never be efficient. My assumption is it would be because maybe that's what they said about the solar industry back in the day,
Yeah, yeah, and
so I
I
not,
don't like the ideas of
yeah,
like stuff will never be efficient. We have to look honestly at energy balances, of course, but and maybe yes, it is kind of quite late in the defossilization path that we just fly on non-fossil fuels. Um, but still, there's no point in saying, hey, it's impossible to not to, right? So
exactly.
but there's some physical principles which we should stay aware of, right? And for example, that it is always more energy intense and energy costly to remove carbon from the atmosphere from direct air capture than from a concentrated source. That's just physically the case. But there is always like contexts, for example, cheap energy in a certain region, like in the Sun Belt in Middle East, for example, um, where it still makes sense. And honestly, we also have a context which is the climate crisis, which we also have to consider, right? So,
Yeah, it might be a reason why. Yeah, that's the one thing that I haven't walked away from totally in terms of what I'm talking about, but the moral question seems to be the loser recently, right? I mean, so the whole like you must do this because it's the right thing to do, or it's, future generations, or all those things. Those arguments have been said a lot, and people tire of hearing that, I've noticed, um, for better or for worse. And so now we're all rolling up our sleeves and looking at the business case, the energy case, the math, basically. What is the math for doing this? How does it fit into societal math?
yeah.
Yeah, it's all math, right? Which is why I'll probably call you back and have more conversations with you. But like, but it's, how do you make this work inside markets, inside, societal demands, inside material flows, like you said at the beginning, energy, materials, it's all about those things. However, and there is that, legacy carbon in the sky that's still
Hmm.
we're adding to every year. And I, actually had gone on Chat GPT because I'm not a mathematician. And so I just asked Chat to be my mathematician. So I was trying to figure out what the price of ton per carbon would be worth removed if you took all of human activity, the value of all of human activity over, let's say, the next 100 to 1,000 years, right? And then divided by how much carbon is in the sky, or how much carbon would actually prevent said activity from occurring. That would be the value per ton of carbon, wouldn't it?
Oh, I mean, it is kind of the economic value add over the next 100 years or so, which would not occur if we would have entered into a too severe climate crisis. I mean, there are a couple of calculations of the effects of the cost of the effects of emissions from the
Yeah.
quite old, from 2017, from the German Environmental Agency, I think, and they already came to prices of at least, I think, the lowest estimate, and that was derived from a discount rate, right? So you discount later damages to be not so severe today. Was like almost $200, and the higher estimate was above 600, if I
Yeah.
recall correctly. What did Chat say?
I have to look it up. It's a very good question. It was an
It's
exercise. I have to look it up. And I think that, so is there also a time quality? Like if, let's say you removed carbon in 2025, and that carbon has been away for X amount of time, is that more valuable because you did it sooner, because you were helping earlier? Things like that. I
yeah,
find
yeah.
that to be,
There's
if we had a moral world, these things
Mhm.
actually would have value, wouldn't it? But it doesn't.
I'm not perfectly sure here. I believe in, like, what are the ethical foundations here we are applying? So how responsible are we for like beings in some generations down the line? But I actually don't know. I mean, there are species, not only human beings, there are species getting extinct every day. So there is to orient yourselves ethically in this context, like of human economic activity, is quite a challenging task, and being a mathematician is probably not the best qualification here. Um,
I don't know. I think
but
it where math meets where math meets philosophy, I think is where,
I think
yeah.
we should always look in a way at like ourselves, our our fellow human beings, and then probably a greater global perspective, and think about like what our activities and our intentions are in this respect, like for us also. And when I look at Carbon Future, and I'm founder and CEO, how I look at decisions we make or I make, I'm taking. And you asked me how I'm doing when we started the conversations, and I always look like first, like how am I doing myself? How do I feel myself? What does it? How is my company doing? And like the employees, and maybe the investors, and our clients and stakeholders. And then how does it fit into the overall narrative of mitigating the climate crisis on the one side, and helping the economy to come um, into functioning mode that is more sustainable, right? That's kind of a three steps, and that's how I orient myself ethically. I try to, at least.
So where are you headed in the next, well, maybe we'll talk in 3 more months or so, but where are you headed in this? Are you taking a little bit of time off in the summer? Are you letting things sort of, um, you know, go on as they are now, or do you have a big push on something now?
Our overarching strategic focus is to create carbon removal or carbon as an asset class together with our partners from the financial industry, and take into account regulation, understand the jurisdictional kind of boundaries we are operating here, and try to provide more certainty what it actually is, with which liabilities, with which risk profiles these activities come, to really enable established financial players to engage in that field, and also help regulators to kind of build their frameworks, which then can support a proper industry. Because as I said, society overall, the entire society together, has to pay for carbon removal, because there is no private actor who can benefit directly. So it's just impossible otherwise. That's at least my hypothesis, and nobody convinced me otherwise until now. So that is my key focus, and there's a couple of elements that play into that. And for Carbon Future, the core thing, as you know, is we our claim is like carbon removal you can trust. So we try to provide like a trust layer for this industry, based on that, providing transparency into the actual activities, providing transparency and also education on the contractual and the regulatory constraints. And so improving that through insights, through data analytics, through industry insights, and learning more with a scaling industry. That's kind of the short-term thing. And then building these frameworks out on the contractual side, on the regulatory side. That's the overall focus. And how do I do that, or how do we contribute to that, is really with like rigorous due diligence, collecting the data, standardizing it in a way that people can provide it in an efficient, automated way, also at a low cost. And on the provision side, on the data provision side, and with that on the carbon removal production side, and also on the purchasing side, as standardization brings confidence also from buyers. And we need these transactions in the next phase to happen, because without proper transactions, you can't learn how to build a market, and also no market exists. So we need to bring in more buyers. We need to scale supply. So just continue on that journey we are on in order to build this, like the financial and regulatory foundation of this industry. That's like our side of things. The physical side of things, it's a small thing, yes. The real stuff is what Marcel Huber and Climeworks and Exomat and all these players are doing,
Yeah. No, it's not small. It's so big because
right?
without you, they don't have where are they selling all their products and who's
Yeah,
buying them. So yeah, it's a chicken and egg and chicken thing that this industry is in, but it'll get there, hopefully, right?
yeah.
But
We,
we'll
we
be
do our
watching.
best. We,
Yeah, it's one of those things where, again, I think extremely exciting times with the utilization side
Mhm.
and finding what Marcel has done with Syncraft and other, finding where you sit inside the industrial world is very exciting.
Yeah, and stay positive and never give up, right? So
Be brave.
yeah.